Without further ado, can you all give a warm welcome, please, to Frank Coffield.
I have got my own speech to make, but I can't resist responding to Michael. 3 quick things and then I move on. First, I thought your talk, Michael, was a party political broadcast. Second, some advice. Don't use OFSTED as a source of information. OFSTED is a tool of government, nothing more, nothing less. 3, please don't use political words in my company, political weasel words like employability. The people I've come here to represent today want jobs. They want decent jobs. They don't want to be made employable. Can I move on? My favorite quote from you, Michael. They didn't believe they could win an election if they told you what they were going to do. I think you were referring to the health service when you said that on television. You could have said it about education. You could have said it about the police force. You could have said it about anything this coalition government has done. Framework of the talk, straightforwardly, simple introduction. I'll say something about classrooms, colleges, the role of the state, and a few final comments. There is a full text of this speech. I've only got 20 minutes. I've got a full text with full references if you want to read more about it later on. I want to begin with what the most important thing is. What is FE for? Well, for me, it's always been the same. The purpose of FE is further education. The clue is in the name. The FE does not stand for further employment, and most certainly does not stand for further employability. FE is about second chance education, it's about vocational education and training, it's about lifelong learning. There is a great social and as well as individual benefits for further education, the wider benefits of education about health, about social cohesion, about social mobility, about improving our citizenship, just as they do in Germany, of which I'll have plenty to say when we come to the panel. But the questions I want to raise are, do our students leave our FE colleges as skilled workers as well as being active citizens? Are they able to cope with the main threats to our collective well-being, like climate change? The answer to my questions are a very emphatic no, particularly not if this government is going to take out climate change from the primary curriculum. They need general education as well as vocational training as they get in Germany, France, and Scandinavia. And in the apprenticeship system in Germany, Michael, the first sentence of it is you get a contract and it says, this is to make you a citizen of a democratic society. It doesn't say we're making you into a trained, skilled engineer. Right, let's start with transforming classes. What's the situation in classes just now? Cuts in funding that are leading to redundancies, contact time in class sizes increasing, the pressures to ratchet up test scores, inefficient competition for students between schools and all the other fragmented sectors of the education system. OFSTED has got 159 new criteria. Is any surprise that it's difficult to get an outstanding? Now they're specializing in TLA, belatedly. The grading of lessons, only 10% of vocational qualifications now going to count. All of this is at the pace of change, massive changing priorities. What's the source of all this stress? Who's causing it all? Let me make it absolutely clear. It's government pressure. It's government policy. The biggest handicap to improving standards in this country is government policy and has been since 1988. Okay, what's the evidence base for improving teaching, learning, and assessment? There is now a growing consensus within the academic community, within the research community, about what makes for effective teaching, learning, and assessment. For example, formative feedback, of which I'll be seeing a lot more in my workshop later today. I'm talking about the work of Dylan, Jeff Petty, Robert Powell, John Hattie, Lauren Anderson, Phil Race, people who are represented here in this room and in this conference. But also, there's a consensus about what's ineffective in teaching and learning. Learning style has been already mentioned. Fixed emotional intelligence. If you want a good summary of what we should not be doing in FE, look at Philip Adey and Justin Dillon's book, Bad Education. Right. In the research I'm doing at present in FE colleges and sixth form colleges, I'm trying to put on a continuum teachers' responses to innovation. Extreme left, you get the enthusiasts. People are prepared to have their work filmed and discussed by their colleagues. Now that takes real courage. Then you get the majority of teachers, I think, in the middle. the healthy skeptics who say, Frank, I'll take one or two of your new ideas, I'll try them out. If they don't work, I'm going to drop them. Perfectly good response. But then you get the unengaged, the teachers who turn up to professional teaching community meetings and say nothing, do nothing, hope that any innovation will just pass them by. And then at the bottom, the other side of the continuum, you get the resistors. People who are saying, I don't care what it is, I'm not going to change, right? Oh, is this the flavor of the month? Or I'm doing this already. Or, as they say in the northeast of England, I'm not bothered one way or the other. Right? Now, we all know there are some people like that there, but they're a small minority, about 5%, according to the work I'm doing at present. But I want now to concentrate on the damage that's being done by government policies. Now, government policies from all the political parties, I am not making a party political statement, unlike Michael. First thing, performance management is the problem. Second, privatization. Right? The performance management turns us into human resources to be managed. Privatization turns public assets into private profit. And an unregulated market is about unhealthy competition, which is wasteful of resources. Here's the damage done to students. I'm calling it in the new book I'm just writing, the new disease of bulimia academica, by which I mean our students are reduced to bulimic learning to get through their studies and get exams. They binge on information, and in government-induced bouts of vomiting, which we call national tests, they spew out as much as they can remember. And they feel worse afterwards. I'm talking about my own two kids here, right, who are put off. They get A's at A-level, and they don't like the subjects they've been studying for years. They're put off them because of this terrible urge to get A stars at everything. So the testing regime we've got at present is not rigorous. It's emetic. Since I retired 5 years ago, I go around the country doing teaching and learning sessions in FE colleges. When I talk to the staff there, not in all by any means, but in the majority of colleges, there is one word that comes up in conversation, either privately or publicly. What is the atmosphere in this college like? What is the climate? The word the staff use is toxic. Right? Your word, not mine. The word is toxic. That's the feeling, the atmosphere in colleges, right? In my words, I think it's a sick sector, right? Part of a sick system, right? Because the malaise that I'm talking about affects schools and universities as well as FE. The damage done to staff as follows: increased stress and workloads, decline in sociability at work, endless paperwork, reporting, bureaucracy, more and more bureaucracy, more surveillance of tutors, grading of lessons, and what's happening in the colleges, in universities, and in schools. An unhealthy gap is growing between the senior managers and the teaching staff. Second section, transforming the colleges. I put the teachers along on a continuum. I'm now putting the colleges on a continuum. At one side are the exam and skill factories, and on the other side are communities of learning. And I would put all the colleges somewhere in between, with most of them more at the skills and exam factory side than the communities of learning, right? But why is it difficult to move colleges from the left to the right of that continuum? Why? Because general FE colleges, as you know better than I do, are extremely complex social institutions. You've got classes and workshops. You've got multi-sites. You've got students from 100,000 14-year-olds in our FE colleges, 14 to 19-year-olds. You've got every subject in the curriculum for hairdressing to history. You've got pre-entry to degree, right? Is it any surprise that it's difficult to get an outstanding when you've got all that to cope with, right? It's almost an impossibility. And let's look back in history just for a moment, from incorporation in the 90s onwards. What happened? To survive, FE colleges had to become successful businesses. So principals became CEOs. And the language of business invaded education. And principals ended up managing by data, not by example, but by data. And the career path for FE, and in schools and in universities, is move into management, away from teaching. You move into the management spine and you give up teaching. So all our best teachers are in senior management and don't teach. Right? And now that OFSTED has made TLA the #1 priority, the issue then is, how do we create a new culture of learning in our colleges? Well, let's look at the advice from OFSTED. Look at the quote. That's our chief HMI. He either knows nothing about the psychology of human beings, or he's being deliberately provocative, or you choose any other interpretation you like. But mine is the latter. I think he's being deliberately provocative, and he was chosen as the chief HMI to go in the tradition of Chris Woodhead, because their role seems to be, let's give the teaching profession a public kicking every so often. That seems to be the role of OFSTED in the modern world. And what's been the response of the Secretary of State to that outrageous quote? Right? A Secretary of State who had any respect for the teaching profession would have issued a public rebuke, or they would have dismissed him. No action was taken. What would constitute a learning community? I've only got time to mention three factors, three features of such a community. Learning becomes the central organizing principle of the college. That means principals to the 14-year-olds all show that they can learn. Why is it then that in the LSIS Aspiring Principals Program, which I've spoken on for years, why is it that their research is just about to be published by IFL? Why is it that the majority of them, when they go back to their colleges, having done a 2-year program on aspiring principals, no one asks them a question of what has happened, or asks them how they could learn from their experience? My interpretation of that is, learning is something that students do. It's something that teachers in the front line do, but it's not something that managers do, and it's certainly something that politicians do, right? The second feature would be a very heavy investment in TLA. I'm talking about doubling or trebling the CPD budget if you're going to make a success of that. It's going to have something of that order. There's a strong and growing knowledge base in teaching and learning. We need principals to be discussing theories of learning and how it impacts their practice just as fluently as they discuss whether Arsene Wenger is coming to an end of his Arsenal career. Right? It's got to be like that to be a real community of learning. We need a library that's well stocked with TLA journals and books. We need a large percentage of our staff out doing higher degrees in teaching and learning. We want TLA to be a standing item on all agendas of the SMT, and we need governors to be protecting TLA in governors' meeting, in board meetings, by being experts in it. Of course there's a place for experts from finance and accountancy. Of course there is. But where are the experts in TLA on our governing boards? The third item is, the third feature, the climate must encourage risk-taking, principled dissent, a developmental model of CPD rather than a judgmental one. And I think there should be an end to the grading of lessons. If you're going to ask people to say, here's where my weaknesses are in teaching, help me with it. How can you expect people to come forward and do that if you're grading lessons, right? And please, I'm also concerned about that there is poor teaching there. I've been doing research in this area not to be aware of it. There's a very small number of inadequate tutors removed, but we don't need the grading of everyone to find out who they are. The students will tell you within 5 minutes of going into a college who they are, right? And they should be removed, and removed with dignity. But we shouldn't be putting all our staff through this absurd, pressurized grading of lessons to find out who the 2 or 3 bad teachers are. Now, all those 3 features are already in colleges. Nothing of what I've said is new. All it means is that they need to permeate the whole system. The practical outcomes of those ideas would be the key resource in the whole sector is the tutor's time. You cannot do everything I'm asking tutors to do if you're teaching 24 hours a week. I'm taking that as the average in the sector. It's got to go down to 20 hours. It's got to go down to 16 hours. We're talking here about the future FE. That's where it's got to go. We need sabbaticals for all staff, just as you have in higher education, including support staff. If it's a real community of learning, everyone is learning and everyone gets time to learn, to reflect, and to develop new ideas. And so, please, I do not play to the gallery. SMTs, the senior managers, must become educational leaders as well as the business managers they've been forced to become. And I think they could show that teaching and learning is now the #1 priority of the sector by actually doing some teaching, by leading from the front. Let's go to transforming the role of the state. We've had 25 years of reform since 1988. The question I want to ask is, why are we not world-class already? How long is it going to take? How many transformations are the government's going to put us through? It's like the health service. 7 transformations since 1945. When are the politicians ever going to get it right? Here's the catalogue of failure from the DFE, right? Just look at, I begin listing the abandoned initiatives or initiatives that have to be revived seriously within a 1 or 2 years of being introduced. The national curriculum, NVQs, GNVQs, Curriculum 2000, modern apprenticeships, University for Industry. Do you remember the University for Industry? Where is it now? Right? The Open College, gone. Training credits, lending accounts, training and enterprise councils, SATs, LSCs, diplomas. Diplomas was supposed to be the qualification of choice for the future. I mean, I remember saying that at college, at conferences like this 5 years ago, and where are they? And where's all the money and resources and your energy gone in producing the diplomas? And now we've had the farce of the English baccalaureate. An absolute farce, right? If DFE was a college, OFSTED would have closed it, right? And the government would be currently turning it into an academy. But here is the one thing I think I agree with Michael with. Only one, I'm afraid, Michael, of all the things you said. I like the jokes, the rest was nonsense. There is the result of the mismanagement of education in England is that there is no prestigious vocational educational route in this country. We're talking about 50% of the population. But by this government and by all the other governments, they're not nearly as important as A-level students. They're not as politically sensitive as A-level students. No one cares a damn about FE in the media. When I try and get things placed about FE, I'm told it's not sexy, Frank. We don't want to carry your articles. That's the problem with FE, right? And yet, let's go back to the Crowther report. I'm old enough to remember it and have read it. It was called Half Our Future. They're still half our future, and we don't pay nearly enough attention. Let's look at the total government failures of all parties to produce a development agency for further education. It began with a staff college. It then went to FEU. Then it went to FEDA. Then it went to LSDA. Then it was QIA/CEL. Then the LSIS. Now it's the FE Guild. Question mark. Right? 7 attempts, and they've all failed. Right? The minister who produced the idea of FE Guild is no longer there. He's gone off to make a mess somewhere else. Right? I've got a suggestion to BIS about the name. Why don't we call it the Staff College? Wouldn't that be a lovely artistic circle to go back to it and remind everyone, this is where we started 40 years ago, and we're no further forward. Right? The cost in money and human terms is an absolute litany of shame. I want to ask the politicians, how many shots do you want? You've had 7. How many is it going to take? Right? Your Keep calls it, this is the biggest train set in the world. And the reason it doesn't change is because the opposition cannot wait to get their chance to play with the train set. I was in DFE recently. There was a skip out the back. I suddenly realized what it was for. 4 false assumptions. All political parties believe this. TLA, teaching, learning, and assessment, is a simple technical matter. And you know, we ourselves don't do ourselves good in this area because we talk about toolboxes, TLA toolboxes, as if it was a simple mechanical matter of going in and pulling out a tool and solving it. You try saying that to staff in Newcastle this afternoon who are working with seriously disadvantaged refugees from all over Europe, right? And they've got 25 of them in the room. What's the tool that you take out to make a sudden success of that? It's extremely difficult teaching. The complexity of teaching learning we've got to restore. There is no learning system. There are no feedback loops. The government's not interested in what any of you think about any of their policies. That's the problem. We don't have a system. You are invisible when policy is being developed, but you become indispensable when it has to be enacted. Right? There is no adequate model of change from this government or any other government. We know as practitioners that change in education is slow, it's painful, it's incremental. What do they want? Miraculous transformation before the next general election. Right? And here's the last assumption. Education simply leads to qualification. It goes on to, you then get skills, you then get a job, you get higher wages, you increase productivity, international competitiveness. That's the simple causal link. It doesn't work at every level. Something breaks down there. Right at the beginning, for example, I've only got time to talk about those who drop out or fail examinations right at the first point there. For no fault of the college, lots of people drop out, right? Talk about the aspirational society. Well, here's what the aspirations are, right? This is the Evening Chronicle in Newcastle, Saturday, February the 2nd, this year. I came out of watching Newcastle scoring a wonderful success, and here was the local paper. 2,500 people apply for 80 jobs. There's what they aspire to. They aspire to jobs, to real decent jobs. That's what they aspire to, right? The underlying problem. I've got about 3 minutes, is that right? We don't live in a democracy. We live in an elective dictatorship. That was Lord Hailsham's phrase in 1978. And as you know, he was not a member of the loony left. He was a member of the loony right. Now, that's not fair. I'll concede that he's an eccentric like Michael. He was an eccentric. The alternative, said Lord Hailsham, is a theory of limited government. Far fewer acts of parliament. All parties must be consulted in advance. My suggestion, we must devolve power to the professionals, to us. We're the experts in FE. We should be saying what's happening, right? Not the politicians, or in conjunction with the politicians, as they do in Germany. We need more regional power, more authority to the local more power to the local authorities. My position can be summed up quite quickly. I'm all in favour of democracy. It's just most politicians and most ministers I can't stand. Final comments. That's a second point of agreement between Michael and myself. He said no to my question, and I say no to my question, but not a total no. There are some advances we can still make in classes because of the work of Jeff Petty and Rob Powell and others, right? We can still do some good things in classes because we have more freedom than we think. We don't live in a Stalinist society, but we've got to use the freedom that we've got. But that's at class level. At college level, we have a culture of fear. The high-stakes testing is deeply inimical to the creation of communities of learning. My prediction, and it's not one I have take any pleasure in coming out with, is that the sixth sector will get much sicker because of the type of learning youngsters are being forced to adopt. I think that one of the great virtues of FE is overplayed, that you're so responsive and adaptive. I think you're too responsive. I think it's high time you stood up and started making minimal requests of government. For example, why shouldn't our representatives be present when new policy is being developed? Could that be an outcome from this conference? My last comment, and I'll stick within my time. What keeps me awake at night is not the clamorous demands of the market fundamentalists to have more public assets turned into private profit. What keeps me awake at night is the predecessors in FE who are asking me questions at 4 in the morning. Frankly saying, what are you going to do to defend this sector? What are you going to do to defend the people in LSIS who are going to be dumped into unemployment, and yet they're able, committed people who are trying to serve FE? What are we all going to do to defend young people to get a second and, yes, a third chance for further education? What are you going to do to defend this sector? Thank you for your attention.